It's going to be very, very difficult. What we've shown at IRENA in our World Energy Transitions Outlook, there is a pathway. It means a lot of change in all the sectors, in the way we consume and produce energy. And it needs individuals, governments, businesses all working together to achieve that. And the window is narrowing all the time. So we need to act fast. So there is a lot of money going into it, but it's not quite enough yet. Our estimate is that we need to quadruple those amounts of money. And that needs to happen every year. We need 4 times as much money, certainly in the period to 2030 to 2050. So yeah, that money needs to be found and invested into projects, but also into the sort of broader framework. You know, we need money to retrain people, for example. We need money to insulate our houses. There's a huge investment needs. Yes, so let's start in the developing world. I mean, this is where we see in some countries, especially in the least developed countries, there's almost no money flowing into renewables investment because most renewables are invested in by the private sector. Private sector, corporate companies, private banks, they see investment in these countries as very risky because, I mean, this is not just for renewables, this is for all industrial development, because they might see political instability, they may see a lack of regulatory framework, they see little demand, and affordability is a problem in many countries. So they may not actually see a return on that investment. So it's a very complex problem which needs to be overcome through really public sector investment. Well, we still actually, you know, we're saying, oh, we're doing so much on renewables, but we're still struggling to understand the overall scale of it. And there are so many reasons why projects are being delayed. So it's not even just about the money going into the projects, but we have very complex approval procedures. We have public opposition. So actually for a project to come to the financing stage, it takes a long time. But then also we're seeing some companies struggling to get loans at effective rates, especially the companies who have more innovative products. So that's quite challenging. So at the moment, the majority of investment goes into 3 technologies. Solar PV, that's about 43%, and then I think it's 35% into onshore wind, and then another 3 or something percent into offshore wind. Solar PV, that has really changed. You know, the picture was very different, say, 10 years ago. It's become a lot cheaper, and it's very easy to build, of course, much easier to build than, say, a complex renewables project like hydropower. And a lot of that investment in solar PV now is the very large-scale solar farms. It's less so, I mean, there's still money going into rooftops, as we see a lot here in Switzerland, but it's mostly the large-scale solar farms, and some of them are massive. I live in the United Arab Emirates. We've got some very massive solar farms in the desert, where of course we have the space and it can be done easily. So at the moment, electricity accounts for around 20% of global energy consumption. So of course it's important to invest in electricity technologies, but we also need to invest in the end-use sectors. So we know that here in Europe, we need to decarbonize the heating system. We need to get away from gas. So we need much more investment in, of course, individuals investing in heat pumps, but also investments in district heating infrastructure and then renewables that feed into this district heating, you know, large solar thermal, for example, or bioenergy. But we also need a lot more investment in industry. So there are a number of options. Industry we consider as hard to decarbonize, and it's mostly fossil fuel based. The steel industry, for example, it's very hard to get coal and gas out, so we need to invest in hydrogen, for example. That's seen as the best option. And at the moment, the amount of money that flows into that is very small. So we need kind of strategies of how we get money into these sectors. Well, it's so in some of these sectors, it's very early stages of investment, so it's still very risky. There are some technological challenges, for example, you know, hydrogen in the steel sector. There are a few pilot projects, and at that stage, it's always hard to mobilize that large-scale investment. That's why you need governments to come in and, you know, go from pilot projects to what they call this sort of hydrogen valleys, for example, where you bring together companies and investors. So that's one issue. If you take the heating sector, for example, the reality is a heat pump in many countries is still more expensive than a gas boiler. So people don't necessarily want to invest it, so we may need to have subsidies, which are available in some countries, but not everywhere. Of course, public money is always in short supply because in the end, you know, it means we're all going to pay more taxes if we want to have public funding for money. But we don't see a way of getting some of the necessary infrastructure funded. You know, an investor is not necessarily interested in funding some of the infrastructure requirement or the training, and especially in the developing world, we do need the multilateral finance institutions, which are publicly funded, to really step up and offer more favorable financing for some of these most debt-ridden countries, because otherwise they will never make any progress. And some of this will mean more money, but some of it is also just having different and smarter instruments because what you need to do is you create an environment, you give public guarantees, and then you bring more private sector money in. It depends on which day you speak to me. On some days I'm more optimistic than on other days. It's really difficult to see how we can do it. And you know, this morning I just read in the newspaper that possibly some of these tipping points might come quicker than we thought for the Amazon, for example. So our assumptions about 1.5 degrees might not even be as ambitious as they need to be. I mean, the science will always tell us new things, and you know, we make certain assumptions. This is how much we need to change in the energy sector, and we may need to do even more. So it's very, very challenging, but there are some positive signs. You know, we're building more renewables, but we do need people to really participate. We need people to, you know, cut their car journeys. We need politicians to go beyond thinking about their 4-year terms. They need to think long term. So it's no doubt a very, very big challenge, but we need to be optimistic still. We don't have a choice.